Welcome to UnityNow, a podcast about all things Unity 2020. Unity 2020 is a movement that aims to reclaim our government from the false choice that's presented to us by the, frankly, corrupt duopoly of the Democratic and Republican parties. To learn how Unity 2020 has been designed to avoid pitfalls of previous alternative and third-party presidential campaigns, visit articlesofunity.org. My name is Zach Rhoads, and I'm one host among a rotating cast of patriotic hosts, including Toby Davis and Eric White. I'm very happy to be here, and I'm also joined by two guests who I'm excited to introduce in just a moment. I feel like we've gotten to know each other a little bit better just by overcoming the struggles of our technical difficulties. Before we go on to that, let's address the elephant in the room. Yes, the Unity 2020 ticket. It was a shot at a 2020 presidential and vice presidential ticket. And yes, the ballots have been cast. And no, we're not on the 2020 ballot. It's because that our movement includes a fail-safe that ensures that we would not spoil an election. Namely that before ballots are finalized, if we see no viable path to victory, then we would discontinue the ticket. And we are upholding that promise. We have indeed effectively discontinued our 2020 running of what turned out to be Tulsi Gabbard and Dan Crenshaw together. What has not been discontinued, however, is the effort of tens of thousands of volunteers tasked with carrying this movement forward. Unity 2020 is no longer viable. Unity itself, the movement, continues to grow. Our path forward isn't totally clear, although I presume that I'm in safe quarters telling you that we're going to continue carrying out Unity principles as far as they'll go. And in some ways, although the looming 2020 election makes nobody feel comfortable, it's nice to have some room and some time to connect to other patriotic, values-driven, purposeful, inspiring Americans and explore all of that which we have in common and even our differences, to learn from one another and to build a network of people who want to give value to this country rather than detract from it. As I mentioned previously, I have two guests with me who fit that bill quite well. I'm with Brenden, and Brenden, I'm going to go ahead and give your last name a try. I feel like anytime I see a name with more than two syllables, I instantly tense up. Is it Kumarasamy?
Kumarasamy, but close enough, dude.
Kumarasamy. And I wrote it down, and I wrote it down wrong. I didn't give myself a chance. And I'm with Cameron Campbell, a.k.a. Coach Cam. Gentlemen, pleasure. Thanks for being with me.
Pleasure's ours.
Hey, Zach, we appreciate the opportunity.
Very much appreciate having both of you on. What I'd like to do is, rather than putting your respective life stories in my own words, is to give each of you an opportunity to explain who you are, what you do that's most valuable to you on a regular basis. I suppose the things that best define you as human beings. And then I'll offer my 2 cents about what I've already detected that makes each of you valuable and generally what makes talking to you, for me, from my standpoint, attractive to a movement like ours. Brenden, let's start with you. Could you tell listeners about your background, what keeps you busy during the day, and how you describe yourself?
Yeah, absolutely. So thanks for having me on, Zach. So my name is Brenden, and I'm the founder of MasterTalk, which is a YouTube channel I started to help the world master the art of communication, public speaking. And I think the lens that makes the most sense in introducing myself is the reason I started this YouTube channel was to democratize the way and how we communicate to each other. Because if we lived in a world where everyone had the right tools about how to communicate properly, I just think there would be a lot less division and a lot more ideas that would be shared on the table, like this very movement. So it's a pleasure and an honor to be on.
Coach Cam, let me turn it to you. What's the potted Coach Cam story? What keeps you busy and motivated?
Yeah, so what keeps me busy is driving us forward, and like us is everybody who chooses to get on the bus, right? So like as like a big black male, as a person from the South, as a Christian, as a person of faith, I feel like it gets easy to create these like sub-segmented boxes of like who us are. That's not my 8th grade English teacher wouldn't love that statement or who us are, but ultimately like creating opportunities for those most in need, through entrepreneurship, through philanthropy, through innovation, through ideas and safe spaces for folks like, like this space to either agree to disagree, or just to be enlightened by each other.
What's your career path, Coach Cam? Obviously, we'll call you Coach. That's your preferred way to be spoken to in terms of professionally. So, tell people a little bit about that.
So I've had a number of different jobs. I say I'm like 50 dog years old as far as career. So, in a nutshell, I've worked around pro sports most of all my life, or around athletics all my life. Spent a number of years coaching, an athletic director at a charter school here in Houston. Was able to build a lot of success there and kind of leverage that into the public speaking space, and really from that, just put on my social entrepreneur boots. And so I launched a sports construction company, Texas Athletics Construction, and it's a social entrepreneur machine. And so we use a significant amount of the revenue that we generate from that business, in the philanthropic space to give back to underserved opportunities, the pockets of Houston. And then I started speaking publicly about 12 years ago. And so from there, launched my first book, Alpha Redefined. It's about servant leadership, and really just moving that movement as far as possible. So really excited about our current product we're releasing here in the coming weeks. Win the first quarter of your day, a playbook for wealth, health, and success. And so really it's just about mastery and how to leverage the 4 o'clock to 8 o'clock window, 4 o'clock in the morning to 8 o'clock in the morning, to leverage success that you can generate yourself. So by the time you sit at your desk, you're truly working in a high capacity.
Well, I will say this. I see both of you as, I did do my homework and I read up and watched some of your content. I see both of you as individuals who thrive on giving value to others. Your efforts are definitely laudable. And I see your efforts as playing well with our movement. I think you've already started to describe some of the ways that's true. And we'll learn about each other a little bit more as we go. A few things that come to mind immediately. Brenden, when soliciting feedback about our unique, I think you could say, political movement, one of the points of one of the critiques we get is that the movement itself needs more charisma. And I could see that this is something we talked about before recording. Not only are you sort of bubbling over with charisma, you seem to have a deep understanding about why others may be less naturally charismatic and good speakers, and you're eager to teach that skill. Coach Cam, a lot of your work, I think you've said, is around football and kids, and you mentioned in another interview, hope I don't butcher it for you, you can correct me here, but that there was a time when you were approached by someone and asked what seemed like a trick question, and it's something like, what do you feel is more important, teaching football, working with kids? And you answered that question in a way that you knew to be true for yourself, which was that the value of working with kids was most salient, priority. I may have told that wrong, but it captures the spirit of what you were telling. And that's what we're dealing with in our movement. We see that it's more important to immerse ourselves in difficult discussions and decision-making processes than it is to play politics. Having said that, I want to bring it into a little bit more of a loose conversation. I want to get some keynotes out there ahead of time, though. So I'll ask one more question to each of you before I open it up for a little bit more loose dialogue. You've both been in contact with some volunteers and leaders of the movement. I've given you a little briefing. You understand, the basic tenets of what's going on here in Unity 2020. First, to either of you, maybe Coach Cam, I'll kick it to you first, and then we'll both get it. You'll both get a chance. When you think about what's happening politically and in our country, what is your read on what's going on? Does anything worry you, and what are you optimistic about?
Yeah, well, I have spent a little time unpacking, the movement and what you guys value. And I think that, I think it's dope, right? So I think that to be able to have a space where we can agree to disagree, have thoughtful engagement, have banter, it really, and I do talk a lot in an athletic kind of framework, but, when I look at what's out there today, it does make you ask, like, is this a team I want to play for? Right. Mm-hmm. So I think that when you look at the person who's in the White House today, because of everything that's going on and how polarizing everything is today, we forget, and I'm saying we again as a community, as a nation, like we all want the person sitting in that chair to be successful. Like there's no doubt about it. And so, when you get to a point to where like, I don't want this person to be successful, to me, you breach like what patriotism truly is, right? So we don't want to alienate the person in that seat. We just got to put the right rascal in the seat, right? And so, when you think about for a second, the idea of compassion, the idea of love, the idea of inclusion, the idea of everyone's best interest, even if they don't fit like my box or like my my base, that's what to me, that's what being an American is about. That's what being an amazing leader is about, is oftentimes doing things that are counterintuitive to your best interest for our best interest. And I think that, where we are now, like I don't, we don't have that right now. And I think that, looking at, to finish your question, what the next 60 days holds for us, I think we're in a position that for those who are in our age group, like this is our civil rights era. So like what our grandparents or what our parents talked about and the stories you hear, like we're etching that out like in real time for us.
So first of all, funny, not funny that you mentioned, is this a team that you root for? That was something I was thinking about, you and your association with football. It feels like perhaps it's like, a lot of people on the left and even some people on the right, when they look at the news, they're sort of in a sick way hoping that Trump does something stupid, fuel for anger, frustration, or, validation for fears that they've had about him. And I was thinking that it's probably similar to coaching a team you don't want to win, which is so bizarre to think about that way. But when you put it into practical terms, it is a lot like that. Brenden, I guess same to you before I branch off a little bit. What do you think about the movement as far as you understand it? And when you think about what's happening in our country right now, what makes you pessimistic? What makes you optimistic?
Yeah, absolutely. I think the overarching way of thinking about this, and I think Cameron has brought up a lot of great points here, is this idea of thinking in gray. A lot of people, and the issue we have with today is we're black and white, right? We're either Democrat or we're Republican. We're either pro-abortion or we're against it. There's nothing in the middle. It's always this you're either with us, or if you don't pick our side, you automatically become the enemy. And I think it's that very superficial way of arguing that has led to all this division in this country, right? Is this idea that we can't just meet in the middle and say what's right and wrong about both perspectives. And I think what this movement helps to do, in my opinion anyways, is it makes us say there's things that are right about being a Democrat, and there's things that are wrong about being a Democrat. There's things that are right about being a Republican. There's things that are wrong about being a Republican. And if we don't understand that nuance, and we don't bring that nuance to the table, we won't actually be able to solve some of the hardest challenges that the country is currently facing. So definitely think that the movement has been interesting, but I am optimistic about this idea that hopefully, as society progresses, that we can come to this idea that we should all come together and start thinking in the gray.
I am worried that it makes sense to me because this is what we're doing too, but I am worried that no matter how many people we talk to, the problems being surfaced, we're doing a pretty good job with that, but the optimism bit's not getting a lot of play. So I'm hoping I can bundle that into talking about your respective work. Cameron, how does your work map on to whatever you see right now as the state of nature right now in the U.S.? I mean, in other words, how do you see yourself as an individual, the connections you're making, the things that you're doing? How does that map on to everything we were just talking about?
Yeah, well, I think I'd start by answering that by kind of piggybacking, the statement you made before that. And the question I would pose or frame is like, do we want to be well as a country, right? And so there is this attraction to having, a sore on your arm and picking it, right? And so it's like, do we want to be well? Do we want to heal? Or do we want to continue to pick and pester? And so, from that, my next thought or framework is, there are so many agents, and I use that word carefully because it may not be the best word to use, but there are so many agents in our lives that are asking us to turn our brains off, right? Instead of like turning our brains on. And so when you think about that for a second, to answer your question, I'm literally like on the side of the freeway holding up a sign saying, like, I need you to do whatever you do the best that you can. And I think that when you ignite the light of like the best version of yourself, it's almost like if anybody who's gone through any kind of like diet or like major like body shaping transition, it's like you're shedding a skin of yourself. And so, my framework is saying like, hey, here's a skill set that I have, like as just my natural skill set. I'm also like an extremely competitive person. So like, I'm so driven to be the best version of myself that I'll also work on my weaknesses. But if that's not you, no problem. But if you're the, croissant maker at Panera Bread, when you wake up in the morning, put yourself in a framework to make, like, you're an artisan. Like, your job is to create amazing art. And what that art looks like, you should have pride on. So whether it's a barista making coffee, whether you're digging ditches, whether you're cleaning poop out of, like, as a plumber, it's like, that is your art. That's your work. And I think that because so many people don't find value or no longer find value in what they do and in themselves, that it's almost a race to the bottom to pick that fester. Right. And so almost to Brendan's point, it's like, yeah, I can't feel great if there is no social currency for me to be stop and go clerk. It's just a job. Then my day has no mission. It has no purpose. And if I have no purpose, I turn my brain off. So when I turn my brain off, I let Facebook, Insta, whoever you call it, Fox, whatever you want to call it, I'll let that person decide my perspective, my opinion, my insight. And so to answer your question, I'm just saying, like, wake up and be great at what you do, because what you do is a gift. And selfishly, I need that best version of you. I need the best croissant you can make when I get my breakfast versus just making one with no energy.
So you're, first of all, you are sort of doing as you preach, and you're trying to find purpose in everything you're doing. And it just so happens that the purpose that you have is in not only building people up so that they can see that purpose of themselves. You're also saying it's not just that you're giving a gift to somebody. It's selfish also. You're taking back a gift from people being the best versions of themselves.
Yeah. I mean, I think that, that's when we work as a country at our highest level of like, hey, this is my skill set. I'll bring it to the table. I'll pour it out kind of, I'll pour it out. So in the South, we have like crawfish boils in the spring, right? We miss crawfish season because of COVID. But what the dopest part about like a country crawfish boil is, you got the crawfish, I got the shrimp, you got the potatoes, I got the crabs, pour them on the table, and let's all eat. Let's collectively enjoy the fruits of what we have to bring. And so what I'm saying is, like, yes, I want you to be invigorated when you go to when you go to your job, or when you do whatever you do, whether it's, school, work, whatever it is, because like when you bring that energy to that croissant, when you bring that energy to whatever it is you're doing, to your studies, to your work, you make me better. And I'm going to come every day ready to ring my bell and bring my A game. You owe it to me to bring me your A game as well.
Brilliantly put. Brenden, this is bringing it to a meta level. I understand that I'm doing the classic back and forth, your turn. So I do want to open it up just after this. I want to give you, Brenden, a chance to answer the same question that I offered. And I'm also I'm deeply interested in how someone who teaches speaking, you're very well spoken. I can tell already. I've watched your videos and I know that you are. So you certainly are not somebody who's speaking out of school. And one problem that I see, I don't know if you've seen The Social Network, but I don't know that you need to see that movie to be perceptive that this is going on. People are loud in sort of an illusory way on social media, not so much in terms of speaking on behalf of their own best interests articulately. So I'm curious, same to you, how's your work map on to whatever you think that is happening in our country right now, the nature of the U.S., and what it really means to you that people are able to literally speak in terms of public speaking, and how that maps on to being more articulate generally.
Yeah, absolutely, Zach. I think the way that I think about MasterTalk and what I'm trying to achieve that relates to the progression of our society is this idea of how to communicate change effectively. Because the challenge is that even if we have great ideas, if we don't communicate them in a way that those ideas spread, we won't have change. And an example I can give that's clearly evident is this idea of gay marriage. Isn't it fascinating how quickly that problem got solved? Like in the 90s, if we were talking about gay marriage, it wasn't something we would even consider. Yet 20 years later, great things happened. All states legalized it. So what explained that not just the effectiveness of the movement, but how quickly the movement spread? And in my opinion, it's due to a couple of things. But I think the big one is how quickly the idea spread. The difference between the previous generation and this one is we all knew someone who was affected by that and said, hey, we need to band together. And the group of people that band together weren't in the tens of thousands anymore. They started being in the tens of millions. So the change that needed to happen happened a lot faster. So the way that I think about MasterTalk and the next problems that we need to solve in our society, things that we need to legalize, things that we need to change, is all about how do we weaponize, how do we empower the people and the voices that don't necessarily have the financial means to afford a speech coach. So if you think about, I don't know, people who want to be a president or somebody who works in a Congress, they generally have the resources to afford a professional speech coach who's either just as good as me or maybe even better than me, depending on the situation. But if you think about, a rural village or a rural city, low income in the US, they can't go on YouTube and learn how to speak because the content's pretty bad. They can't really hire a speech coach because they run at like $300-400 an hour. And they don't have that ability or that the access to the right tools, rather, to make their message heard. So I think the way that I've always seen my work, if there's one sentence, is I kind of want to be a bridge between every one of those people. So if all of those little millions of voices got heard, there would be this huge conglomeration of messages that would spread like wildfire.
I feel that's something that you two share. It does seem like you want to be giving to people who can't always, are not the top candidates to be able to afford the best kind of help that there is.
Yeah, the one thing I'd add. Oh, sorry.
No, please.
Yeah, so the one thing I'd add to what Brenden said is, and again, I'm old Southern boy, right? So like the rules that your grandma gave you typically are like so much more valuable the older you get, right? Mm-hmm. And so, the only thing I piggyback on that is, there's a saying, God gave you 2 ears and 1 mouth, so you should listen twice as much as you talk. And I think that, that's the piece added on top of what he's building is, you've got kind of the Gary Vee school of thought of marketing. Then you've got like the Seth Godin, right? And like Gary Vee's like, you get to talk, you just shout and yell. And it's like, yes, because you do have a voice, right? But, I'm not undercutting what you're saying at all. I'm agreeing with you, but it's like, yes, in that development of your voice should come a temperance to listen. And what you'll find is like, we live in like this 80% window. Like we all want the same thing. Like we all want the pursuit of opportunity. We all want to feel free and safe when we move around. We want the best for our children, for our families. It's a marginal 10% that we can see different, which again is okay. But it's like if we can develop the temperance and the patience to listen, added with the ability to communicate effectively, to your point about gay marriage, like 99% of our problems would dissipate. I mean, they're just not there. Like where they are is a fog of miscommunication.
In that line, what's a time, if you can think of one, that you took a break from talking long enough that you learned something that you did not think you would be, you'd be engaged with? For instance, I'll tell on myself. There's a man named Charles Murray. I don't know if either of you have heard of him. He wrote a book called The Bell Curve. And what I've heard, his book was, and by the way, your answer is not to be political. Mine happens to be. But what I learned about his book before reading it is that his conclusion, his thesis, was that on average, Black Americans have an intelligence of a standard deviation lower than white Americans, who have a standard deviation intelligence lower than Asians. And I thought, I won't swear on the podcast, but F this guy. Who is it? So I went on, I figured where there's, someone else said this before, where there's smoke, there must be fire. This guy, screw this guy. He came to a college in Middlebury, where I live. I live in Vermont. So we came to Middlebury College to speak about another book that he wrote, and he was violently protested. So I had competing motivations, and I was thinking, well, I've been speaking out against this guy. At the same time, I don't like the idea of violent protests. So he's in my area. I host a podcast. I wonder if he'll come on and talk to me. So he did. He wanted to come on and explain who he was, what happened. Then I had read his book in the meantime, which is, I didn't realize 800 pages, absolutely rigorous, but I really did read it. And what I realized was that he wasn't making claims like that about race. He included something about race in one paragraph of his 800-page book. And basically it was saying, based on all the studies that I've gone through, these seem to be the results, whether it's true, whether that, and if insofar as it is, whether that's genetic or something like that, or insofar as it is, whether that's completely environmental and the way that we construct society, we don't really know, and we don't really think it matters. What matters is that we don't discriminate based on someone's intelligence either way. So after hearing that, I was like, damn, I really changed my mind about this person, about the work that he was doing, and I pinned him as someone that I truly nearly hated. I think about as close as you can get to hating someone. I thought, this is a horrible racist. That when you talked about listening more than talking, even though that's not what I'm doing right now, that's what I thought of, as I really learned something that to learn it and to believe it, it had to run antithetical to something that I believed to my core. And so that's more what I'm asking, is if you have any situations like that through your teaching, and where you've been able to take a step back and become the student rather than the teacher.
Yeah. So for me, the first thing that comes to mind is experience I had in Bible study, actually the day after I went pre-COVID to a weekly Bible study in the River Oaks area in Houston. So steep in like old wealth, conservative, like old white guys. That's what, like, so like the next youngest person in this Bible, I'm 38, just turned 38. The next closest person's like 65. So it's like, just like old white guys, right?
That's your crew for sure.
That's my crew. Well, we like the Rat Pack. We get to Vegas and we shut it. We shut that silver plate dinner at 5:30 down, and we go. So I sit. So to your point, like, I sit in that Bible study, which is about faith. So for the most part, like, extracurriculars don't really come in place because we're all there for that one thing, right? So it's a Thursday Bible study. The Thursday after the election, I mean, these guys are like high-fiving, and I mean, like high energy for like a bunch of old white guys, and which I wasn't tripping on that. And so I did at the end kind of step up, and we don't typically talk much outside of like family and faith. And so I said, guys, I'm guessing most of you guys, all of you guys voted for Trump. Cool, no problem. Help me understand, like, how were the polls? And if you guys flash back to that Tuesday, it was so far off.
Yeah.
And so it's like, help me understand, like, I understand a bit about polling. Like, I don't have a landline, so I understand they're not calling me. It's like, they were like you, right? So you guys still have home phones and answer, right? So it's like, help me understand, like, why? And the answer, Zach, was, it gave me a moment of silence, like I'm sure, the professor did with you with that book, was, the response was, I didn't feel safe to give my honest opinion in the poll, because folks who are to the far left slam and shut and boycott, and like if you disagree at all with anything they say, you're toast. And so I didn't even feel comfortable in a poster conversation, or even putting out my opinion, because I didn't want to get canceled. And so that was that moment. That was one of those moments for me where it's like, what? I thought I knew, kind of to your point, like what they were going to say, or I thought I knew why, but like, wow, that's something to really sit and think about for a second.
Brenden, I think we've pinned you as the talker, but ironically, you've been patiently listening to both of us, probably mostly me. Any reflections on anything you've heard so far? And of course, I feel free to respond to that anything Coach Cam just mentioned about talking versus listening in that ratio.
No, absolutely. I try and live what I preach. Yeah, I guess. But no, I think the idea that I found interesting from what everyone is saying right now is is just this idea of how do we come together, right? How do we bridge all of these perspectives to kind of figure out what the best answer is and what the best solution is? Like back to this idea of student versus teacher. Like for me, I try and be a student every day. That's why I listen to 2 hours of podcasts, and I always try and seek out people who completely disagree with my views. You know, people who do a bunch of weird things that I would disagree with, people who would lead very bizarre lives. Because I think the number one sign of intelligence has nothing to do with the degree, has nothing to do with social status, but rather your willingness to embody other people's truths. Because the dark reality, or I guess the nature of who we are as humans, since we're storytelling machines, is we usually embody the beliefs of everyone that we grew up with. So I'm not a Democrat because I want to be. I'm a Democrat because everyone else around me was a Democrat. I'm not a Republican because I am one, but because everyone else around me was one. The way that we break that stigma, as you both alluded to really well, is this idea of how do we try and learn as much as possible from different sides of the same coin so that we can figure out what makes the most sense, right? So a classic example, like, that's super simple, is if we think about business, should you burn all of the bridges and go all in, or should you have a side hustle and do? But the answer is both. Like, there's pros and cons to both. You don't necessarily need to burn the ships, but you don't necessarily have to not do anything and just focus on your career either. It's this idea of how do you figure out the in between. But it's very hard from a communication perspective to communicate that in between, because what gets votes, or what's in this idea of politics, is extremes. And that's why Trump isn't, or that extreme isn't rather of his own doing. He's the product of what we want, of what the American population wants to vote for. I think that's one way of thinking about it.
You both jumped right into this political conversation without being trapped at all. You're talking really intelligently about this and coming to the same conclusions that we do. I want to build on what you just said, Brenden. You talked about stories being important in the way that they're told. I think that that's something that we need to be thinking about. We're a movement that is saying, hey, let's shake things up 180 to what you're used to. You know, we want some of the principles that pretty much anyone would want, but you still have to introduce this platform to people. You know, you don't want to just shove it in someone's face or say that, how could you not be for this movement or something like that. Just, we don't have to be specific about our movement. We had you on for a reason. We want you to both talk about the things that you do, but have any stories you've heard or any sort of communication or messaging better informed what you do? Does something stick out in your mind?
Feel free, Cameron.
No, go ahead. I need to listen more.
No problem. That's what I'm here to do. But anyways, I think one, and that's why I always like talking about hope and optimism, because I think there's one thing, if there's anything you get from me, it doesn't pay to be a pessimist. What's the point? Even if you're right, even if you're pessimistic and you're right, what do you get? You get nothing, right? You get a slap on the wrist. It's not worth it, right? So might as well be optimist by default. Okay, so now with that sorted, what are some of the ways that we can use the same weapons or the same tools and the same stories in the way that communicates negative change, in a way that gets the ball moving in the opposite direction, in a way towards a more progressive society where we all have better discussions? And an example that stands out to me as just the golden pillar of that is an organization called Charity Water. Basically, what Charity Water does is their goal is to get every single human being on the planet access to clean drinking water. And I think the reason why I'm so excited about what they're doing is not the problem necessarily, but also the way that they communicate it. It's not this story about, oh, people are dying every day, all of these things are happening. If you're not supporting us, you're against us. You're against humanity. This guilt trip that people run on, that the nonprofit sector has been famous for, at least before the 2000s. But I think what Scott Harrison did with Charity Waters, he said instead, how about we create a movement that inspires hope and change? So the way that he describes, his monthly giving program and his mission is, he says, hey, we have a party here. And the party is, let's all gather together. It doesn't matter if you're Republican. It doesn't matter if you're a Democrat. We can all agree, whether you own guns, you don't own guns, doesn't matter. We can all agree that every single human being should have water. In the same way that Republicans and Democrats are all passionate about their families, right? They all have hobbies. I'm sure a lot of them like to bowl, right? So when you look at these things, you say, if everyone can agree that we can all get water, now based on that, do you want to join us? And I think that's what made Scott Harrison so successful. I mean, he's raised, $360 million in 13 years. And he used a lot of his marketing expertise from his days as a nightclub promoter in New York to use in philanthropy. So I think he's a good example of how we can spin the way that we tell stories, the way that we communicate in a way that inspires people rather than detracts them from what we want to say.
You have a thought on that, Coach Cam?
Yeah, I love it. And actually, I'm not familiar with Chris and his movement, but it's almost like identical to how I launched Texas Athletics Construction. And so in 2017, I am a man of faith. I kind of shared that earlier. During the Lenten season, which is a very special time for Christians and for others who celebrate it, I was burdened with, do you drive your career or do you drive your energy like moving your career? Or do you drive your energy doing what you know your spiritual gift is, which is giving? And I was like physically like torn. And so, the idea was kind of planted in me. It was just like, bro, just do both. And so I started, in residential. So I'd build someone a basketball court. I'd be in their backyard and I'd say, hey, Zach, this is, $30,000 court. But I'll tell you what, I'll build it for you for 27 if you go write that nonprofit a $3,000 check. And then I'll go partner with that nonprofit to go do my community work. And, I think one of the criticisms, so what that did for me was it made it less about, the project itself, but again, more about the mission work being done. And so what it unintentionally did was it's a unique value proposition, which is like not why I did it, but kind of like an added benefit to it. But what it created for me was almost like this pseudo bubble of criticism that I get. And I hear it, I'm aware of it, of like, you're so vanilla and you're so down the middle, like pick a side. And so in the last 90 days, I've been approached by both like major political parties to advocate, get my feet wet, like run for office. And, I'll be honest, I won't say what I said on this call, but I'm like, if I take this call, I got to curse you out first because both of you need a foot up your ass. You know what I'm saying? Like before we even get to like why I would do that, you got to understand that the reason I haven't chosen a party is both parties have alienated me. And so, like for me, like my dream job as a kid was to be I wanted to be a senator growing up. Right. And it wasn't until I got a C in poli sci my freshman year that I was like, oh, snap, this is not what I thought it was going to be. And I quickly changed my major to public speaking. But where I'm going with that is this, like, so the idea that it takes 5 years and an election and a half and 3 secret backdoor meetings for me to feed 5,000 people on the south side of Houston versus me taking what I can do in the free market as an entrepreneur and then leverage my community, right? So the first year was like, hey, here's the money I have in my pocket. But very quickly, it's like, yeah, this isn't going to cut it. I mean, there isn't enough money in my pocket. So look, guys, like regardless of where you stand, like help me put this fire out. And so kind of going back to what I was saying earlier, like if we all began to look around us, number one, realize how blessed we are. But number two, there's little small fires all around you. So you don't have to, raise $300 million. You don't have to raise 10, 50, like whatever you can, put the fire out around you. And like, that'll make it for a safe table for us to then begin to say, okay, let's reevaluate what we have here. And maybe a third party, is the best option. But, but it's almost, kind of going back to the beginning point, we're enjoying watching the fires around us instead of giving a damn about putting them out.
In that line, sort of, we have an entire, I mentioned tens of thousands of people who are volunteering for this movement here, who are, I know some of them are warriors, they're resilient, and I know also that a good chunk of people are upset, they're let down a little bit. There's something that we knew was a long shot, but so much energy in it. I don't know if this is in a book that you wrote or just a concept you've come up with, but you talk about winning the first quarter. You mentioned it earlier to me. And you were saying it's about what you do from 4 a.m. to 8 a.m. I was thinking I get up at 9. But but you were talking about, winning the first quarter, and how does that apply to a group of people like us who right now feel like we just went all out for something and we're going to need to leverage whatever the remains are of this thing that we failed in one perspective, maybe gained in another.
Yeah, so I'll try to explain it as clean as I can using like a real life example. So the school I coached at is a school called KIPP Houston. KIPP is a chain of charter schools. I'm sure anybody in education is familiar with them. And the school was like notoriously academic based. Like they used to literally have pep rallies to give out report cards. So like the idea of like a pep rally for the cheerleaders and the football players, like that wasn't the culture. So when we came in, we got our butts kicked the first season. You build momentum, you build championships in the off season, right? So the idea of, no matter how much momentum you had, whether you started or not, you were limping into your first game. And so I see it again as a coach different. What I see is just like an NFL or NBA team who wins a championship, the short side is your off season gets shorter. What you guys should really frame yourself as is, no, your off season got longer. Like this is an opportunity to build momentum. So you're ready to run through the brick wall in 2024. Like, so yeah, lick your wounds and your butt hurt for a minute. You get that after you lose a game. But the whole thing is, it's way harder to teach after a win than it is after a loss. So learn from your lessons, lick your wounds, and now you've got that much momentum than whatever party is going to lose in the next 60 days. And so to me, it's about reframing.
What do you think, Brenden? I mean, for however many thousand people are looking down on the ground trying to figure out where that optimism is that you mentioned, why be pessimistic if you get nothing from it? I also know that there's a pull toward pessimism that sometimes feels difficult to sidestep so that you can become optimistic. Anything you want to address on that, and please be selfish as you want and include, your own lessons and the things that you teach.
Yeah, for sure, Zach. I think the way that I see it, because I was there, right? I woke up at some point in my life and I just said, crap, I can't solve anything. Like I'm just one person. What am I supposed to do with my life, right? And I'm going to be dead in a couple of decades too. So where's the hope, right? But I think what I learned that gave me a lot of optimism is by answering the following question that nobody on the planet asks themselves. We always ask the same question. What are we the most passionate about? Passions are great, but here's the problem with them. They're general, they're non-specific, they don't get us anywhere. We can be passionate about our dogs, our family, but we can't mold out that problem unless we're in that 5 to 10% of people who already have it. But the question that we should ask more of is, what is the world's easiest problem to solve? Out of all of the problems out there, because there's a bunch, trust me, you could just turn on the news for a couple of minutes and they're just going to list them all out for you so you can just take notes. Out of all of those problems, which problem, just one, are you personally going to take ownership of? My life philosophy is simple. Solve 2 problems, and hopefully I get them both done before I'm dead. One is public speaking. If I don't democratize that information and I die not doing it, I'll take responsibility for that. The second problem is the water crisis, because I think it's the world's easiest problem besides that. But the punchline is I'm taking personal responsibility to getting those 2 things done. So I put all my energy, all my resources, all my money into those 2 problems. But the punchline that I want to drive for everyone who's listening is, if everybody did that, instead of complaining about the thousands of problems that we have, we would all take ownership of our own individual set of 2 problems, and we'd solve problems overnight. I mean, Elon Musk is solving 7 problems, and he's probably got 4 out of those already solved. We don't need to be like Elon. All we need to do is pick one for all of us, and the world would just be a better place.
I've heard both of you talking about how to build yourself up as an individual. And both of those, it sounds like both of those ways that each of you think about building yourself up, that transcends, that goes also to being more cohesive. So it just sort of leads to more cohesion, because if you're more confident about yourself and you're doing more generally, then you're able to see the world around you as, a world that you're interested in collaborating with. I think I don't want to put any words in your mouth. So this is a question for either of you or both of you. How do you think a person or a group or people in general can be more cohesive right now, where we see things are divisive and possibly, they can look bleak for some people?
Yeah, so I mean, I think the way you do that, and really to kind of piggyback what Brenden was saying, is like just find your thing, and again, no matter what it is, right? So I can say, like, I care about my ecosystem, my community a lot. I'm not a pet guy, so like, sometimes making like the 19 cents a day, and it's like the Sarah McLachlan, like, it doesn't move me, and that's okay, right? So I don't need a pet shamer to be like, yeah, take that, like, don't wear chinchilla. Like, yeah, I'm from Texas, bro. Like, if I shoot it and I want to wear it, I'm gonna wear it, right? Like, that's just the way I see the world. But to his point, it's
Coach
like,
Cam
yes.
2024. No, I'm just
If I can shoot it, sorry, Cameron.
I might eat it. No, it's cool. But it's like, but think about for a second, like, would we have that banter at a bar? No, we'd be all looking at the exact same game on the TV, like in our silos, not having that like joyful transaction we just had. Mm-hmm. And so, whatever your passion is, whether it's creating opportunity for underserved families and kids, whether it's, helping first and family being generation, whether it's fixing the broken, educational system, which is like a whole different can of worms, right? But it's like, whatever your thing is, like, make it your thing. And just make it your thing. And then, like, look for teammates who also have your thing. And so, again, like, if water's not your thing, cool. If pets aren't your thing, cool. If education is your thing, it's a whole lot easier to find folks who agree with you than it is to find folks who disagree.
Brenden, you may as well hop on.
Yeah, and just to build off Cameron's great points here, I think the idea is you solve by community. The only way to build cohesion is to talk to people who want to be cohesive first. Right? If you go straight to the people who are negative, you'll get terminated because you'll be surrounded by just negativity and you'll lose. Whereas if the first thing you say is you go, I want to be solution focused rather than problem focused. The next step of that equation is which events in my community or which virtual events in my community can I go to meet other like-minded community people? And then from there, that gives you a lot of encouragement. So then when you attack the system and you lose, well, you go back to that community. The community encourages you and you go play again. It's like, for me, the problem I'm trying to solve as an example here isn't the world's hardest problem to solve. I mean, it's not that hard versus if I was going directly to the education system and saying, hey guys, we should have a public speaking course. This is exactly how you teach it. I coach a lot of kids on this. I charge a lot of money. Here's the curriculum for free. Go do it. Who's going to do it? Nobody. Right? I know exactly the curriculum, A to Z. But if I try and attack the system directly, I'll die trying. I'll be depressed. I'll be sad because no one's going to want to listen to me. Even if I have the results. I'm not charging people money. It's like free. Here's the curriculum. So instead what I do is I always ask myself, what is the momentum builder? What is the way and how other people have solved similar problems that I can navigate through in a way that still gives me hope and optimism, so that when I come out on the other side and I have those quick wins, then I feel I'm invincible, and then I can gradually tackle harder problems. Because the issue with not just the country, but everybody, is this idea of untapped human potential. Most people are just not making a move at all. Right? So you have people like Zach, you, Cameron, myself, that are making moves. We're doing something, trying to make something happen. But there's a huge percentage of the population who's just sitting there doing nothing. And if they just all did a little bit of something, the country would be just moving really, really fast. So I think that's what my mission has always been.
We did a thing here where we reached out to people that we saw were making positive differences in the world, had unique sets of skills that we thought might be unlikely, perhaps, maybe we're wrong about that, to just go into something together and have a conversation, because those are really what we think. Those are kind of some of the traits that we think would make a valuable, cohesive system. This has worked out really well, especially considering that, I was able to brush both of you up on what the movement is, but I didn't really need to. As soon as I started explaining it, and as soon as I understood that you were listening and I wasn't giving you a pitch, just explaining what we were up to, you're both sort of nodding along, had your own ideas that built into it. We're not saying anything crazy here. And so this conversation itself, I think, has been perfectly cohesive. What I tried to do at the beginning is, because I didn't want to have to make you put this into your words. I know how awkward that can be. However, I might get you to try. I was trying to explain some of the reasons why I think that both of you are good people to be talking to, both to, mobilize the people who are in our movement, and perhaps to give some advice that is vague and broad enough that it could apply to anybody, but also that's sort of tailored to what we're going through. Why do you think, given your own sets of skills, strengths, things that you're passionate about, it would behoove people in a movement like ours to get to content like what you put out, or things like what you do? And you can be as selfish as you want about that statement and say, okay, my YouTube channel specifically does this, or you can just, give me anything about the sort of niche that you're in and why that'd be beneficial to people like me and the listeners right now.
Go ahead, Cam.
Yeah. So, for me, I'd say, well, first off, like Brandon dropped some gems, right? So I cannot ignore the fact that, like, bro, you brought some smoke, right? Like, thank you for saying a lot of what you said previously. You're so right. And regardless of your ability to contribute, you have something. Like, no matter what it is, what you do, who you are, as inconsequential as you feel, like, you're here, and that's a gift and that's a blessing. So, like, start there. So thank you for saying that. What I'd say is, like, when is the last time you felt damn good? And whether that was earlier today, whether that was a couple of years ago, like, no matter what that success is, success feels good. And, I think that the word success has been captured by, like, the materialistic space, when, like, success is like getting your kid to stop crying, or success is like, finishing your GED. Success is like, no matter what a win is, wins feel good. Like, but the challenge is, they're far and few between. There really is not a straightforward roadmap on how to, like, acquire them and string them together. And it's way easier to lose than it is to win, right? And so people begin to just quit. They choose to exit out of the game of trying to figure out how to win, because losses are kind of sat on your lap. And so for me, again, just like, if I were to have a manifesto, or what I live by, it's three words. It's inspire, advance, evolve. And so if I can inspire you, then I can get you to advance. And if you advance, you most naturally should evolve. My birthday was a week ago today, and I almost canceled it. And, it's like, it's COVID and, whatever. And I was taking a walk with my family, and it just hit me like, you're as blessed as you choose to realize that you are. Mm. And so I could, walk around butt hurt, and I'd like to be able to do this, or, this year was a rough year of business, or whatever, like, the person's situation may be. But you're here, but you don't have COVID, but you were able to see another year, right? So I'm as blessed as I choose to realize that I am. And so, with that framework, with that mindset, who am I? Who is Trump? Who is Biden? Who is anybody to say, like, what you don't deserve? You deserve the best version of yourself. So let's go get it.
Off to you, Brenden.
That was awesome, Cam.
Yeah,
that's for sure. I think the way that I see this is my favorite quote that I won't take credit for, that I think I invented, but I don't want to take it up. But the quote is as follows: "Be insane, or be the same. If you want to be like everyone else, that's totally fine. But let me tell you what same gets you. It gets you obese, gets you divorced, it gets you depressed, It gets you in a job you don't like, running after retirement that might not even happen for you. And that's what leads to all of this anxiety and this division. We always try to fit in. We always try to be like everyone else. And in that pursuit, we associate our political views, our societal views, our cultural views to every single one of us around us. And that leads us to misery. But if you want to be successful, and more importantly, you want to be focused on the solution rather than the problem, I think the best way of doing that is to learn the art of insanity. Don't you find it bizarre that a 22-year-old kid started a YouTube channel, not on pranking, not on vlogs, not on comedy, but on public speaking and communication tips? They started coaching CEOs at 23, but lives in his mother's basement, doesn't own a car, sings karaoke in 8 different languages, can dance alone in his basement an hour a day, and doesn't own a car. How do any of those decisions make any sense at all? And that is the point. When all of the decisions that you make in your life only matter to the only person that matters, which is you, you're probably making the right decisions. And by making those right decisions, what will happen is you'll start to develop controversial insights about how the world should be, right? For example, hey, we're going to sleep in strangers' houses and pay them for it, which is also Airbnb today, and all those different ideas. And from those unique insights, that is how you'll be able to start a movement, to start an idea, to make a change that only you can make. And I think I'll add as another layer that I usually don't talk about is, why am I so excited about what I do? I realized really early in life that I was the only speech coach who spoke multiple languages, who was in his early 20s. Who else was going to inspire 16-year-old Julia to share a message? Right? So I realized I was the only person who could do that. But the only way I realized that was because I became completely insane. So if everyone did that, I think the world would just be a better place.
I want to thank both of you for, I think one of our producers was telling one or both of you before the show started, I, like so many people, have had just life difficulties that have arisen from our situation in lockdowns, COVID, our political divisiveness, and then just in my family. So it's it was important to me to be able to talk to people that I don't know, who I hear are facing some of the same difficulties and facing them not with their head down, but head on. Both of you happen to be just completely ripe for the picking for an interview like this. And I want to know, as we trail out, how can people get in touch with you or in touch with your work or follow you or find you? Brenden, you had a little momentum there, so I'll turn that to you.
I appreciate that. So, anyways, if you want to check out the YouTube videos where I share public speaking tips, it's MasterTalk in one word. And if you want to connect with me on Instagram, send me a message. I answer every single DM I get. So that's at Master Your Talk. It's always happy to engage with questions or comments.
Coach Cam, how can people find you and your work?
Yeah, so social media, YouTube, Instagram, Facebook, Twitter, Coach Cam Cares. And, like Brenden said, I check all my DMs. Or I don't have I don't know what a shadow bot is. I don't have any of that stuff. So I get to everybody. And then my book, Alpha Redefined, 12 Servant Leadership Principles of Legendary Leaders. The course, Win the First Quarter of Your Day. And then I have a complimentary digital magazine I created during lockdown. And kind of to Brendan's point, just like, let's create art, right? So it's free, there's no cost. It's just like, if you want to know what's in my head, if you see the world I do, the way that I do, if you see it differently, like, here's everything that I have kind of like out, right? So just let's like share some work. That's called Crown and Glory Magazine. All of those can be found on CoachCamCourses.com.
Brenden, I'm thinking about what you said, be insane, kind of dare to be insane. There's a Watson and Crick quote, and I don't remember which one of them said it, but it's something like, if you're going to change the world, then you're by definition unqualified to do so. You talk about being insane, so I completely understand. I wanted to say that as a way of saying, I understand what you mean. At the same time, I'm thinking about 2 or 3 crazies I know who might hear that and say, I'm on the right track. But anyway, I knew I was doing it right. Look, thanks to both of you again. For people listening, for people tuning in to the video, Unity 2020, of course, is no more, and we will be keeping you updated on what's going on with the entire movement. Make sure to tune into Brett Weinstein's Campfires. But obviously, unity and the principles behind it and our movement will continue to move on and grow. And that was kicked off today with Brenden, Coach Cam. Thank you, gentlemen, so much for being part of the podcast.